All right, on the phone with me right now, I've got a big deal when it comes to rock and roll music. One of my favorite bands that come out of the late 60s, Spooky Tooth. He was a founding member of that band, successful all in his own right, and now an author as well of a new book, Dreamweaver, Music, Meditation, and My Friendship with George Harrison. Gary Wright on the phone with me right now. Gary, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, John?
I'm doing just great. And hey, can I ask you something? How does one meet a Beatle? Especially back when the Beatles are, I mean, they were... You know, when you met them, boy, they were, they were always at their peak. But, how did that start off? How'd you meet George?
Well, it was kind of a situation where I had known Klaus Voormann, who was a close friend of George Harrison's and the Beatles. Klaus was from Hamburg, and he knew that when they first were there touring at the Star Club and different venues in and around Hamburg. And Klaus had played on my first solo album, Extraction, so we had known one another. And I was working in a studio in London producing an artist one day, this is like 1970, and the phone rang in the studio, and I picked it up, and it was Klaus, and said, look, I'm in the studio with George Harrison and Phil Spector, who's producing George's new solo album, and I need another keyboard player. Can you come down right away? And I said, I'll jump in my car in a minute.
Right.
So I left the session and apologized to the artist for having to leave so abruptly, and drove to Abbey Road Studios and walked in control room where all the Beatles stuff had been recorded, and there was George and Ringo and Eric Clapton and Billy Preston and God knows who else. And I learned the song, and George showed me the chord changes. He had a special vibe to him. He was not like anybody I'd ever met before. He was very centered, very focused, and incredibly creative, and disarmed any apprehensiveness I had, from meeting a Beatle. And Ringo was the same way. He was wonderful. And so I played that day on the first track, All Things Must Pass, and George invited me to come back and play on the rest of the album, and we became friends and maintained a close relationship. He saw, I think, that I was interested in spiritual things because he was very much into that, burning incense in the studio and having pictures of yogi masters, and so that was the bond, really, that drew us together, as well as the music, of course, and that relationship maintained over his entire life.
Yeah, and as we all know, and I don't think anybody ever accused George, where so many people did stuff in a way of a fad. Maybe John Lennon was like that, for instance. I don't mean to bring him into it or anything, but with George, that was his quest. That was his. It seems maybe in his mind, and I don't mean to project what I think onto him or anything, but certainly his purpose here. He was. That's a big deal. That's no small thing. And the fact that you and him shared that together, I would imagine made you guys pretty tight friends. I mean, you guys traveled to India and everything, and you guys, you really did share that throughout the rest of his life, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. We definitely did, and it became a bond that we had in common with one another. And when you have that kind of a relationship, when you're philosophically aligned with another human being, it's a different kind of a relationship. It's not just an acquaintance or, a superficial friendship. It runs much deeper than that, and that's what we had.
Yeah, well, it's very exciting, too, and I think, because I know certainly with relationships I've had, there's people like that, and I know what you mean. Now, when you guys would go to India and stuff, how were Westerners taken and accepted, I suppose, when you guys would go out there? And I know George, maybe, given who he is, that might be a little bit different there, but... was that a bit of an uphill climb for you guys when you went out there, or was it no problem for a couple of Englishmen to make their way out there and do what you guys did back then?
Well, I think he was very much accepted in India from when he first went there with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and I think that a lot of Indian people, who of course a lot of people knew the Beatles there, and he was loved and respected, and of course Ravi Shankar, that affiliation, who was one of George's closest friends, people knew that. As a matter of fact, when he did pass away, there was this beautiful billboard outside of one of the major cities in India, and with his picture on it, and it said, "There goes the sun."
Really?
How touching! What a touching tribute! Yeah.
Yeah, that is. George was, like you said, him better than I, dare I say, but certainly a guy who you can't help but enjoy. And as far as his solo stuff goes, Boy, that holds up with any of the guys when it comes to music, especially the album you were talking about with All Things Must Pass, probably the greatest of all the post-Beatle solo albums out there. And boy, his son Danny does a great job with George's legacy and his own stuff, doesn't he?
Oh, he is. Yeah, he's a wonderful human being, and he looks so much like George too.
Oh, it's downright spooky in a good way when you see him up there. You can't help but smile ear to ear. I think so. And so nowadays, Gary, what are you doing? I suppose that you still this is your way of life as well. And you go on. You still playing with Ringo?
I have done 4 tours with him. I haven't recently done the last couple of tours he's been on. I've actually do my own shows, of course, and I go out with other artists as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then writing this book took me about a year and a half to write it, and so that took up a lot of my time. And probably in the future, I'm not really sure yet what I'm going to do, whether I'm going to do another album or whether I'm going to write another book, but that'll unfold in the new year.
Was this your first book ever writing?
It was, yes. I wrote it myself. I didn't have a ghostwriter.
Oh, that was my next question. Being a songwriter, how did you? And I guess being that you didn't use a ghostwriter, how did you find the process?
It was very interesting. At first, it was a very daunting task for me to do. I thought, well, I've never written a book before. I'm not really an author. But then I started to think about it, and I thought, well, writing lyrics to a song is not that much different than writing a book, except you're limited to rhyme and meter in writing a song. But in a book, you have no limitations. You can write sentences a paragraph long or however you want to do it. So I actually enjoyed it, and the process was really a lot of fun for me.
That's great. It is a wonderful read. I got to check it out over the weekend. And if I may ask you, because I've been a fan of Spooky Tooth for a long time, Gary, and they're a band that seemed to have kind of, in the long haul, maybe kind of flew under the radar a little bit, but you guys put out some fabulous music. Do you still get together with those guys from time to time?
Occasionally we speak on the phone, or, we did a small tour back in 2004. But not too much because they live in England and I'm here in L.A.
You're an L.A. guy nowadays?
Yes.
Are you? Very good. Hey, Gary Wright, author of Dreamweaver, Music, Meditation, and My Friendship with George Harrison, and just an all-around great guy, and been a fan for many years. Gary, thanks so much for taking some time with us today. And the book is available everywhere, right? Amazon, you can get it. Do you got a website you can get it at, too?
Well, if they go to my website, which is thedreamweaver.com, they can be routed to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any of the major retailers.
Just in time for the holiday shopping season. Very good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very good. Gary, thanks a million for your time today.
Thank you. Have a great Christmas.